Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first session of RCIS digital series. My name is Saad El Hakmi, and I'm a research assistant at Ryerson Centre for Immigration and Settlement. Our RCIS series are about refugee resettlement and integration in Canada, lived experience, lessons learned, and promising practices. Our first session is about settlement workers, immigrants, service providers, and government organizations. For this, we have four guest speakers. Two of them are representing Matthew House Toronto, Jacky Tuinstra Harrison, and Helton Achaye. And then we have Enrique Paraco presenting City of Sudbury Local Immigration Partnership. And finally, we have Sara Asalya representing Newcomers Students Association of Ryerson. So I'd like to first of all introduce you to Dr. Usha George, who is the primary investigator of this project and this series, and she can give us a brief introduction about the project. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being part of this process. And I want to thank Saad and Suhail also for organizing all of this. We had meant this to be an in-person, intensive discussion kind of project when we envisaged the project and then when we applied for funding. But by the time the funding arrived, our realities have changed considerably, and so we have to do this the way we are doing right now. But yeah, I think we are all managing, so thank you all being part of this process. So I'll start by introducing the Ryerson Centre for Immigration and Settlement. It's a university-wide research center where, in addition to mentoring students and giving them opportunities for research work, international experts collaborate with transdisciplinary exploration of international migration, integration, and diaspora and refugee studies. The center has been around for a while, but this is the first time the center has got so many research projects that we have a research coordinator, someone who looks after the entire called Attorney McDermott. She will probably join us a little later. But before I go forward, I want to acknowledge that RCIS, which is the short form for Ryerson Centre for Immigration and Settlement, operates in downtown Toronto, which is territory covered by the DISH with One Spoon Treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee, as well as Treaty 13 signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with the multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. So we need to acknowledge the fact that we are on First Nations territory. We are on a land that is given to us, or we are allowed to share. Now, I mentioned a little bit about this project as we applied for funding. So now the project is on refugees resettlement and integration in Canada, lived experience, lessons learned, and promising practices. This, as I said, turned out to be a digital series focused on Canada's approach to refugee resettlement and integration. The series is funded by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, which we call SHRC. It's called a Connections Grant. The overall aim of the series is to engage stakeholders to consider Canada's approach to refugee resettlement and identify changes to policy and practice that will make Canada more inclusive and responsive to refugees' needs. Through the session, we aim to bring together refugees from the past and more recent cohorts, as well as settlement workers and service providers, policymakers, researchers, and students to share insights and lessons learned from research findings, settlement practices, and lived experience. Again, the impetus for this project came in some ways as a result of a research project we are doing already. It's again a SHRC-funded partnership development grant looking at Syrian refugee resettlement in the GTA. Now, so we had the opportunity to have one-on-one conversations and focus groups with a large number of refugees, men and women, old and young, those who were sponsored privately, those who were sponsored by the government. In all of this, we could actually hear the refugees say that they would like a particular kind of service, or they would like to be supported in a different way, and the kind of issues they're raising. So we thought it would be raising to say, well, we would have done differently, or we could benefit from services if it is designed this way or the other way. So we thought it would be nice to capture the experience that all of these groups have in refugee resettlement in Canada. So the specific objectives of the project are to identify gaps in Canada's current refugee policy and assess the capacity of the settlement sector to meet the refugee needs, provide a forum for refugees from past and present and current cohorts to share their experiences navigating the settlement sector in Canada, and provide insights on how future refugees' capacity in their settlement might be enhanced. Engage with service providers across Canada to share successful practices and areas for improvement, including suggestions for supporting settlement agencies and workers to better support refugees. Share insights from research focused on refugee resettlement and integration, both in Canada and abroad. And of course, increase regional, provincial, and national collaboration and partnership to work towards strengthening refugee supports in Canada. So as I said, we had wanted this to be a 2-day conference, but because of all of what is happening, this is how we have reorganized it. Still, we hope that there'll be intense discussions and we can draw some valuable lessons from all these conversations. Because, for example, excuse me, research has shown us that resettled refugees take longer to so-called integrate than people who come in the family or the economic class. Now, what are the real reasons, and what are the barriers what are the impediments for their integration in a way that they can be satisfied with their lives in Canada? And much of the research that we did, and with the Syrian community, for example, they are happy to be in Canada. They are happy to be in a place which is safe and secure. Their children are safe and their future is guaranteed, all of that. But they still feel like they need to do something more in order to achieve economic independence and to feel as part of Canada. And many of them, they told us that they are not interested in being supported by the state all the time. They like to be, independent earners. And so how can we enhance their well-being so that they can become contributing members and functioning members of Canadian society? So that's this whole project. And then I will hand it over to Saad, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Usha, for this wonderful presentation and introduction. Now we will move to our two next speakers. And the next speakers are representing Matthew House, Jacky, Tuinstra, Harrison, and Helton Achaye. And I will give a brief introduction about Jacky and Helton. Jacky is a nonprofit management professional and passionate advocate for refugees settlement services. She has been the executive director at Matthew House for 1 year. Previously,
Some echo is coming. Sorry, there's an echo there. Can everybody hear? Okay.
Yes, I can hear the echo.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yes. Previously, she spearheaded community dinners programs for newcomers, lobbied for funding for refugee radio programming, and she has volunteered with Sudanese and refugees in Egypt. Helton, he was a public servant in Uganda for 20 years and later became the immigration settlement manager at Matthew House through 2019. Himself refugee, Helton created the the groundbreaking refugee hearing program at Matthew House to assist refugee claimants to prepare for their refugee hearings at the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. Helton is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant and currently managing director at Front Immigration Services Inc. in Toronto. Their presentation will be around 25 minutes, and they will address who Matthew House is, who they serve, and what services they provide, the importance of their work and challenges they face. Included in the presentation are direct quotes from refugees who have lived in their shelter and benefited from important programs such as refugee hearing. So I will leave the floor to Jacky and Helton. Thank you so much. I will allow you to share your screen. So please go ahead and you can share your screen with us and you can share the presentation with us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? I think so. That's wonderful. It's so nice to be here today with you all. And thank you for putting this together. I think even despite the pandemic, it's so helpful and frankly energizing for people like Helton and myself to just still be included in the wider conversation. So I'm going to move fairly quickly through the first part of our presentation today, just to give lots of time for Helton to talk about the Refugee Hearing Preparation Program, and also for us to explore, just when I came to Matthew House, I started 1 year ago, we did a kind of consultation with our former residents, asking them for feedback. So that will, I think, be some of the more illuminating stuff. But I wanted you guys to get to know us a little bit first. So Matthew House is a network of 4 homes, soon to be 5. So we have a reception home, and then we have transition homes. So the reception home is sort of what you would term like a short stay emergency shelter. And the stay before COVID there was approximately 122 days, average stay. The other homes are longer and are meant to support extra vulnerable refugees. At the moment, we tend to pivot that entirely towards youth and unaccompanied minors. And the average stay of those homes is about 1 to 2 years. We started 22 years ago as a faith-based shelter, and that continues to be the bulk of the support. I think most people on this call will probably know that Canada, the federal government, the provincial government, the City of Toronto, there's no pot of money for refugee claimants. So the only people who stay in our shelters and our transition homes are refugee claimants, also known as asylum seekers. And so those are some of the most vulnerable people who really are fleeing and presenting at a point of a border crossing or an inland claim without those types of resources, without support. And they're often, like I'll talk about later, numbered among the homeless. And so it's been really helpful for us to draw a lot of our financial support from the faith community. And if you wonder why it's called Matthew House, the verse is on your screen. It is Matthew 25:35, and that is where the name Matthew House comes from. Wonderful. So in those years, we welcomed over 2,000 refugees from 101 nations. And our mission is really to restore dignity, foster resilience and independence, and provide the kind of communal support that is, yes, we do the settlement work, so filling your OW applications, helping you find legal aid, connecting you with job training programs, making counseling referrals. Yes, we do all of that settlement work, but we live in each house. They're very small, so it's very much like a family community. So each home has house parents in it. And we also have volunteers that just come in before COVID, do game nights, take people out to the museum. And that's the stuff where I often said, even if the government did give us $1 billion, I'm not sure how you can just create that, right? It's that kind of like, people will call you on your birthday, that kind of intangible community building is what we've tried to be quite intentional about. So yes, we talk about the settlement programs, we talk about shelter services. I talked a little bit about how we've pivoted 3 of our homes to address youth and unaccompanied minors, and we'll pick that up a little more in the presentation later. And Helton will talk specifically about what we do to try to help prepare claimants who have such limited legal aid support, really just a small amount of time to really help get them ready for their hearing. Here are some pictures of some of our homes. So the Dundas Street home, again, is the short stay home, and the other homes that we have function more like longer term. And the reason we kind of settled on 2 years is if we get an unaccompanied minor and they're younger than 16, they're very likely going into children's aid. We have had 15-year-olds, but for a short time. But the 16-year-olds, if they're not wanting to go into children's aid or there's not a suitable place for them, they can stay with us, finish high school, and kind of get ready to launch their adulthood. And even for 18, 19-year-olds, it gives them that bridging time to really get settled and get ready for the next phase of settlement. I think we all know who a refugee is. We also abide by that. We have had people who are making H&C claims as well as traditional refugee claimants. So we will also house H&C claims. The numbers we always like to keep track of because it's so strange. Before COVID, every single day, not a day went by, including weekends, where we didn't get a call, and we were full up, always full up. So as soon as a bed would go empty, a bed would go full. It's obviously different now during COVID, but there is still a need. Particularly, we're finding refugee claimants who had been staying with family have kind of, maybe that family's really, really tired of it. Those kind of what were meant to be temporary situations for people, those supports are falling apart. So we're finding that where we used to welcome people, we used to say, like, really, if you've come within the month, you're a good refugee, Matthew House refugee claimant. Now we're extending that many months, or if you're a claimant who's been here up to a year and you're in precarious housing, we are finding a place for those. Last year, of course, Canada welcomed the most asylum seekers or refugee claimants, over 63,000, which created a huge backlog in the system as well, which Helton will talk about as well. I think we all know about the different pathways. And again, I'm just highlighting, so we don't work with government sponsored. We don't work with privately sponsored. We do get a ton of requests about that, either from people who would like us to be sponsors or sponsor groups who want to partner. But at the moment, as I mentioned, we're just focused on claimants and have been for 22 years. I shouldn't say just for the moment. This is some of the learnings that our team put together. Anne, our founder, has been doing this for over 22 years and has a really unique perspective on it. So the fact that they don't have a sponsor, the fact that they're coming alone and most often independently without a sort of anchor contact makes it incredibly difficult because it means there's nobody immediately to welcome them. And I will just tell one brief story, which is Anne kind of got on the path to founding Matthew House and really got excited about doing this project at a dinner where she was listening to someone's story about how they came to Canada. And it was a terrible story of trauma and suffering and difficulty and family separation. And she was waiting for the part in the story where this individual would say, and then I came to Canada and everything was great. But he said, then I came to Canada and nobody welcomed me. And I wasn't prepared for that. And that was actually the hardest part of the journey. Because keep in mind, up till that point, you're being kept alive by hope of the next step is going to be better. Hope of the next step is going to be better. And nobody has told you really that when you get to Canada, it's the new there's a new mountain to climb. So it's a painful journey to arrive and not be welcomed. So we really do focus on that warm welcome. As I mentioned, claimants, by some estimates by Central Intake, City of Toronto's homeless shelter support line, they figure about 30%, maybe more, of people staying in homeless shelters are actually refugee claimants. Just because there is no support system, there's no coordinated effort for asylum seeker housing when they arrive. So quite often they are numbered among the homeless. There are a few other shelters that don't receive government support, similar to Matthew House. There's also Christie Welcome Centre that does receive City of Toronto support. But it's not a coordinated effort, and we're all quite small in terms of the demand, right? I think I counted our maximum capacity, and it was like less than less than 10% of what the demand would actually be citywide. Other issues that we find our residents face is finding long-term shelter. So the more people have to move, or the longer it takes for them to get to a place of sort of at least semi-permanent housing, the more traumatic that is, and the longer your integration and your feeling of belonging is going to be interrupted. So long-term shelter is huge, and you don't want to be having to move people multiple times when they've already been displaced and disrupted. Funding cuts to legal aid. I know pre-COVID we heard a lot about that. It was catastrophic for our residents. I wanted to mention really briefly the Safe Third Country Agreement because there was news on it yesterday. So for people who don't know, this is an agreement that says that essentially that the US is safe for refugees. And so it makes a provision for Canada to return people to the US. Obviously the Canada Council for Refugees, of which we are a member, and other claimant supporting organizations are also members, have been actively fighting against this. So we had a favorable court decision that struck it down just a few months ago that said this is not a safe alternative. But then surprisingly, the federal government appealed that decision. And just yesterday we heard that there's not going to be a stay. So first, when they appealed, the court said, okay, but we're not returning people to the US until your appeal is finished. But as of yesterday, the stay is lifted. So essentially, terrible news in that, at least until the appeal makes its way through the courts, people can still be returned to the US under the Safe Third Country Agreement. And we just feel that that's a terrible injustice and really not holding Canada to its international obligations to claimants and asylum seekers. So I just said the case was won by the CCR, but the ruling was challenged. It's been deferred by the government. So just a note to say that if everybody can write their MPs or show your support for this important issue, we would certainly appreciate that. I'm going to let Helton talk a little bit more about why we started the refugee hearing program. So Helton, I'll just give you a little bit of background. You can introduce yourself. But Helton worked with us in settlement and came up with this wonderful idea, I think largely based on his own experiences and the experiences of people living at Matthew House. And it's just grown a lot. The demand for it is staggering. So Helton, over to you. I'll keep the slides moving.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I am very grateful to be here this morning to talk to you about an important subject matter that is very close to my heart and to the work that Matthew House does. I came to Canada as a refugee. Briefly, I should say that it was not in my intro. Not only as a refugee, but a refugee claimant, the very group that I'm talking about right now. So I'm really talking from my own experience. One of the things that created an environment that caused us to have this initiative was the transformation that occurred, the reforms that, reforms that occurred in 2012 or thereabout, when the government actually ushered in a lot of changes in the refugee status determination. It impacted the refugee claimant in a large way and made it very difficult for the refugee claimant to navigate the process. And that actually created in me the sense that we should actually create a program that can make the whole process a lot less burdensome. And that was actually the very creation of the refugee hearing program in 2013. So let me just take you through the program itself, which is very unique, even in the whole of Canada, probably I could say anywhere in the world. Why is the focus on refugee claimants? Yeah, so the point is, refugee claimants are the only ones among the refugees that don't get somebody receive them with flowers as they enter Canada, so to speak. At that time, as they enter, they don't know where they're going to sleep that night. They don't know who they're going to meet. They don't know whether they will be able to speak the language, and so many other settlement challenges my colleague has already mentioned. So you can see from the word go, the challenge is already very heavy on the refugee claimant from a settlement point of view. But then there is a second and more difficult challenge, which is the refugee status determination. And both are coming head on at the same time. You have to negotiate where you're going to sleep. You have to deal with your claim determination process. So you can see how challenging it gets for the refugee claimant. And they must appear before the member of the Immigration and Refugee Board to make a determination about their case. The process could be 1 to 2 years while this is going on, and you can imagine the anxiety as they wait. They could be denied the refugee status and end up being removed to the country from which they came. So these are really emotionally very, very tormenting to the refugee claimant. Yeah, so what are the objectives of the refugee hearing program? Number one is to bring home and normalize the hearing event. Because when refugees come, and most of us, even on this workshop or conference, do not know exactly what happens at the refugee hearing. It's same with the claimant when they get in, they're from a different country, they fear authority because in their countries they might have been mistreated or violated in terms of their rights. So the claimant would like to have a sense of what is going to happen at the refugee hearing. And this program actually provides that environment, true environment simulated exactly as it would be at the Immigration and Refugee Board. The second thing that we aim to do is to minimize the interference of emotions that are negative, anxieties, feeling of fear, and all that goes around the process that would interfere with the clear and very convincing testimony at the Immigration and Refugee Board. This program actually helps to minimize that. The last thing that it does, probably not the last, but the one that I'm going to mention is, it gives the refugee claimant a chance to take a look at their claim with a lens coming from another person other than their counsel, somebody who has not before spoken to them about their claim, just like the member at the Immigration and Refugee Board would be a very new person. So this is really a second chance for the refugee claimant to have a very independent opinion before they go to the Immigration and Refugee Board. So you can see those objectives are really well tailored. The other thing that I want to mention at this point is, what is it that we do exactly to help the refugee claimant in this determination process, the claim determination process? So we simulate almost fully the very event that occurs at the Immigration and Refugee Board. You have a pseudo adjudicator, you have the claimant, the real claimant, we have an interpreter, we have supervisor who is not actually at the Immigration and Refugee Board. There's no supervisor at the Immigration and Refugee Board. But for our quality control purposes, we have a supervisor to oversee the process so that it is standardized and so that there are no flaws in the process. So that is what we do, a mirror image in terms of the setting, everything more or less like what we have at the Immigration and Refugee Board. In fact, I should say that we were given a flag, the national flag, by the Immigration and Refugee Board, and we put it right at the corner of our office or the hearing room. So it looks more or less like the very setting at the Immigration and Refugee Board. The adjudicators are volunteer lawyers and former members of the Immigration and Refugee Board. And you can imagine the quality they bring to the process. And we are talking to the actual refugee claimant and the actual refugee claim document. These are not fictions of documents created for purposes of simulation. These are the very true documents submitted to the Immigration and Refugee Board. So you can see how useful it can get. And we run the process 2 to 3 hours, more or less the same duration that it would take at the Immigration and Refugee Board, to give the claimant a full sense of all dimensions, perspectives of the claim, so that if the member really begins to ask questions, the claimant is fully conversant with the implications of their claim. At the end of the process, we give a feedback to the refugee claimant. The feedback is limited to how they performed, were they answering questions directly, were they guessing, did they answer questions after they've understood the question, and so on and so forth, eye contact and things like those. We give that feedback to the claimant so that they would be in full control. Next. Yeah, it's important for me to talk about what we do not do, because this program right from the beginning created a lot of, not a lot, actually, some quarters actually had anxiety about how this process would play out. It might have a lot of counterproductive elements, but over the years, since 2013, it just got better, and it's getting better all through the years. And so these are things that can assure the audience and other people that this program is actually well set to take into account the interest of the claimant. Number one, we do not undermine the government regulation or refugee determination process. We do not tell the claimant anything that would amount to a gaming of the system, so I should say. The second thing is that we don't make decisions at the end of the simulated hearing. The claimant is very anxious to say, oh, what do you think my chances are? How did I perform? Am I going to get a yes? We make no decision. We don't indicate which side it might end up. The process is about preparing payment. That's it, no more. We do not record the hearing. We do not charge any service fees for it. We do not promise or suggest that the decision at the IRB will be a yes or a no. I spoke about that already. We do not compel the refugee claimant to take part in this program. It's voluntary, and we do not keep a record of the hearing event. We shred all the documents that we use. We ensure that we don't have a record that might land into bad hands, so we protect the interest of our clients. Yet, in terms of the outcomes, first of all, the general objectives, as I mentioned, is spoken to us by the claimants as I read in some of their feedback comments. But over 350 hearings were booked over the last year. And over 800 members, actually, these are, sometimes you have a family of 3, you have a family of 2, but up to 800 were impacted in this process in the last year. The project is being piloted province-wide, hoping to really add another large number, probably 100 or so, simulated hearings to take place. And actually, as you know, the government has moved to do a lot of online hearings, and we had already, even long before COVID, started this process of simulated hearing on an online basis so that we can touch communities that are outlying, maybe Kitchener and other places. Government as of now has a backlog of about 90,000 refugee claims unheard. And we think that our contribution should also be stepped up so that we can prepare a large number to meet this large demand. As you can see, 90,000 is a big number. So we need to prepare as many refugee claimants as possible for the claim process. Yeah, I can read quickly the quotes. I got a big welcome to Canada from the judge, but if it weren't for you, I wouldn't know how it would turn out. That's one of the feedback we got from the claimant. You prepared me in the best way possible. I held to it like the last straw of oxygen. So you can see how. Next, we have 3 or so that we picked. I wish to inform you my hearing yesterday went well. This person's talking to the team. I got a yes. Thank you so much for all your help. Please inform the judge. The judge is our simulated adjudicator and counsel at the mock hearing. I want them to share in my joy. So you can see this is a lot of gratitude. The mock hearing that was conducted before my hearing was very helpful in enabling me to tell my narrative clearly. Hence, I'm writing this letter to express my heartfelt gratitude. Thank you. As we start a new year and decade, I think this was just the 20. I wish the management, staff, and the volunteers of Matthew House a peaceful, happy, and fruitful year. Very, very interesting comments. So I would like to request you to reserve your questions maybe at the end of the presentation if you have about this program.
Thank you, Helton.
Thank you. Jacky?
And I think it's one of the biggest settlement challenges also that we face is we feel so proud of all the people we've been able to help through this program and how we've grown it from the GTA to now province-wide. But when I think about the number of claimants that will go to the IRB without the benefit of practice, it's staggering. You practice for everything in life. You practice for your wedding, you practice for the LSATs, you practice any exam, you study for your driver's test. This is kind of unique in the fact that they're being asked to make a huge life event without really a lot of information about what that's going to entail for them as a claimant, right? So just a really a big thing that we think a lot about at Matthew House. My colleague in settlement also prepared some notes just on, again, what we see with housing. You know, we also, I don't know if I put it in this slide, but just anecdotally, there is still an awful lot of discrimination and racism happening in housing. I can tell you that in the last 2 months, we have a blind gentleman from Pakistan who's been doing his housing search. And I was on the phone with him and somebody asked him what color he was. We've also had people tell him that they won't rent to him either because he's blind or because he's a refugee or because both things. And he's definitely not the only one. So there's a lot of misinformation, I think, in the housing community and in our communities generally about refugees. And just the affordable housing crunch that we're experiencing in the GTA, because the GTA is one of the biggest destinations. And as I mentioned before, the more often people have to move or the longer it takes to get them into a situation where they're building community and they're integrating, it's diminished returns, right? You're hurting your chances of a successful integration the longer that process is taking. I mentioned why we are focusing at least 3 of our homes around young people. From the ages of about 16 to 25, it's about 24% of refugee claims, and they come on their own. So these would be young people that have left persecution, but also unaccompanied minors who don't have any family in Canada at all. Those are smaller numbers, but they're incredibly unique and challenging cases. I think across all of Canada, there was a small spike a couple of years ago in unaccompanied minors. It's usually only a few hundred, but because there's absolutely no integration and no system of support, it is some of the most confusing and resource intensive cases that we manage, certainly. Also, they are often really not well served by youth homeless shelters, and that's almost 99% of the time where they end up being shifted to. A lot of youth shelters do a really good job with mental health supports and with addiction counseling, but most of our unaccompanied minors and youth we haven't really encountered those problems. It's really trauma, it's PTSD, and it's all the settlement pieces, and youth shelters are not set up to be refugee specific. So you can kind of imagine a young person at 18 and how their life can fork in that very moment, whether they would go to a youth homeless shelter and, you know, what that would mean for their community and their sort of daily world for the next couple of years, who is in their world and what kind of opportunities are coming their way, versus if they come to Matthew House, they'll live with house parents for up to 2 years. You know, they'll have communal eating, we eat together. We try to set them up with mentors. We do counseling referrals. We're helping them with their claim, and they're with other people who are in a similar boat, right? Other refugees, other young people who are also starting over. Actually, this year we had 2 young women move out together. They're like, we're sisters now. So from one of our houses, and then they went and rent an apartment together. They're still together. So that's really what we're going for, is a sort of a pseudo family feel that will continue long beyond their time at Matthew House. Yeah. I really don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide because it's such a huge issue. It's probably like an hour-long conversation on its own, but we just repeatedly see the faces of people fall and their tears falling and their hearts falling when we tell them how long it's probably going to take for them to bring their family over. And it's not a good message to hear right away. Helton told me once, you just say the word, I hope it's soon. Like, you don't want to kill people's hope, but at the same time, like, there's not a great chance to say soon your family can join you. Like, I hope it's soon, but realistically it's going to be years, and it's something that they haven't reckoned with, right? They feel like as soon as they come to Canada, the next thought is, I need to be back with my family, and how can that happen? So family reunification and the fact that it just takes so very long and is so confusing for people is just a repeated thing that we see being a real disappointment and a real struggle for our residents. Okay, the main gaps in settlement that we have right now is due to COVID. We have just delays. So I'll talk about the work permits and the eligibility hearings most of all. It's kind of no rhyme or reason for it. We had somebody come, they presented at a border crossing and they had all their paper eligibility and they had their work permit. I think it was less than 6 weeks, and that was recent. We had somebody come just before COVID, I think a month before COVID, and he's still waiting for his eligibility interview and his work permit. So that, what is that, 8? We're going on 9 months now. To have no information, and also I'm not able to give our residents a timeline for that. Like if I could say to him, okay, it will be 30 more days, or the reason that your claim is taking longer is because of how you came into the country. But there's no actual rhyme, reason, timeline, or information. So that's anxiety producing, right? Because I can wait for something if you can tell me A, how long I have to wait, or B, why am I being told to wait? Because there's a problem, there's a missing document, you did things a different way. But in the absence of that information, people are just stuck at home during COVID in Matthew House, every day checking, did I get my eligibility interview? Can I apply for my work permit? And there's just no ability to plan forward, which kind of kills hope and motivation. So we're seeing that multiplied so much during COVID. And it's difficult for us to be able to provide any kind of a balm for that or a solve for people's emotions. Health coverage is also a big problem that's been intensified during COVID. So interim federal health should cover our residents, our refugee claimants. However, a lot of clinics and doctors are, well, not the doctors, I suppose it's the clinic administration, not so well versed in what interim federal health will cover. And I just think it's a human thing that it's easier to say no. So we're sort of seeing a lot more no's or a lot more inconsistencies in how interim federal health is being applied. So like the flu shot should be an easy one, right? But all of a sudden it's become really difficult and people are saying, well, we won't take the interim federal health for that, which is really strange because it should cover it. Also, occasionally we do get people who don't qualify for interim federal health, or it's taking them a long time to get the interim federal health coverage. And really it's extremely difficult to get them good medical care, and they have to wait a very long time, even when they might have an urgent issue. So it's something that we struggle to find gaps for in other ways. So finding friendly practitioners that we can call on for advice, but it places a huge burden on our staff that aren't well trained to deal with it, right? We're used to people taking the interim federal health and we're able to call a clinic, get you an appointment. And now we're having to go through a lot of other steps and just sort of blindly find our way through that.
Sorry, Jacky, I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want to remind you that you have around 2 minutes to wrap up the presentation that we can discuss. We will have a second part towards the end. We'll have like a roundtable discussion, and then we can ask questions and interact with the audience. Thank you.
Perfect. So last thing, I think this is really good to end on, is just feedback from our residents. So what they liked about Matthew House was the family feel, number one, eating together, people feeling like a family. We do orientation sessions every week. A lot of people mentioned that the information at the orientation to Canada session is really helpful, just cultural information, all of that. We asked them, what does a newly arrived refugee need to know in your experience? This person said it was really difficult that I couldn't just dive into work. There was a huge learning curve. Other people mentioned the emotional stability, the fact that you have nobody beside you to call, that you need to adjust to that, and also have a friend to give you emotional support. That got identified a lot in the survey, so I put that up there. What can we do at Matthew House for residents after they leave us? So we used to have a club. Somebody said they would like it to come back. People mentioned that the events were good, things like holidays and Christmas. Someone else mentioned that we send a birthday card even after they move out, and that they appreciated getting a birthday card. And then we do all the practical supports that gets mentioned too. But it seems like the community connections, the holidays, gathering together, all of that stuff was highest priority. And we do other things for them after they move out, but even more than the like getting you mattresses or, you know, hooking you up with a funding for a position, it was the more intangibles that got higher results in the survey. After the presentation, maybe I'll encourage you to look at some of our videos where our former residents talk about their experience with Matthew House. The one I was going to feature today, but again, I'll just send it around after the conference, is Jose's video. At the second half of his video, he talks about the extreme need for people to believe in you when you immigrate, because you have no more sense of self and place and identity. So I think that's a good place for us to end on, is just Jose's words that, I'll give you his quote: "When you immigrate, you lose the ability to believe in yourself, and you need somebody to take that place." So that's what we endeavor to do at Matthew House for Claimants too, is really bolster that emotional support. So thank you for your time, and Helton, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jacky and Helton, for this wonderful presentation. And you have presented many insightful ideas about what you are doing and what you achieved so far in these years. And thank you so much for that. Now we will move to our next speaker, Mr. Enrique Paraco from City of Greater Sudbury Local Immigration Partnership. Since 2018, Mr. Enrique is an immigration development officer at Sudbury Local Immigration Partnership. His presentation today will address the SLIP partnership, the importance of their work, and the challenges and the settlement and retention initiatives. Thank you so much, and I will leave the floor to Mr. Enrique Paraco.
Thank you very much. I'm just gonna share my screen. Hope you're able to see that, yeah? Perfect, thank you. As Saad mentioned, my name is Enrique Paraco. I am speaking today on Robinson Huron Treaty territory, and the land where I live is the territory of the Tecumseh and Anishinaabe First Nations, and I am grateful for them to allow me and my family to be on their land. As many of you, I am an immigrant. I immigrated to Canada in 2010 as an international student. In 2013, a humanitarian and political crisis started in my country. Now Venezuela has, which is Venezuela, we have now more than 5 million refugees scattered all over the world, especially in South America, due to the current regime that has just recently by the United Nations been condemned for crimes against humanity, extrajudicial executions, political imprisonment, and to be responsible for an overall humanitarian crisis that has had no precedent in South America. I have been, I graduated at Ryerson University in Greater Sudbury, and I was in the public sector, specifically in the sales and marketing. And I jumped to my current position in 2018, thinking that it was a big jump, something that was completely different, but now I understand why my background in the private sector was so important. My presentation is going to be a little different, but I will tackle the current challenges and successes that we've had with refugees and refugee claimants in Greater Sudbury. And so, you know, for all of those that might not know where Sudbury is 3.5 hours north of Toronto. Thank you very much. So the Local Immigration Partnership, which is the project that I coordinate, started in 2010 and is hosted within the City of Greater Sudbury. and is one of the only local immigration partnerships that are located within an economic development department. I can only think of us and Hamilton that are located within economic developments all around Canada. There might be a few more, but I'm not aware of them. The majority of them are either municipally, but in social services, or within a settlement organization. Our funder is IRCC, and the purpose, they called it indirect settlement, which is very hard to identify. They gave us some guidelines of what indirect settlement is, but it's very hard to understand what it is. And we realized what our purpose was, but it's something that is hard to come up with. Local immigration partnerships are, this is IRCC words, are mechanisms through which IRCC supports the development of community-based partnerships and planning around the needs of newcomers. For us, is retention in communities such as Greater Sudbury. That is our main goal, and we are happy that in the last CFP, IRCC allowed local immigration partnerships to officially work on the matter of retention, which is an issue that big communities such as Toronto don't have, but it is good to see the acknowledgement of other communities to officially work on improving their retention rates via the local immigration partnership. Our partners are literally everyone in our community. Settlement organizations, our biggest settlement organizations, and the YMCA Newcomer Services, and the Collège Boreal settlement services that they provide services in French. Let's remember that Sudbury has the third largest francophone immigration, third largest francophone population outside of Quebec. So French is very important in our community, and we embrace our francophone diversity. All public sectors and services are partners of the local immigration partnership, from social services to citizen services to libraries to police. Any small public service that anybody accesses, and at the end, any newcomers access, is a partner of ours. All organizations that directly and are indirectly funded by different levels of governments, nonprofit organizations, shelters, food banks, infant food banks, Salvation Armies. All of those partners are part of our network, including the private sector, immigration advisors, immigration lawyers, employers are part of our network, and including, of course, citizens. We do a lot of cultural outreach to different organizations that are culturally based, such as our Indian community, our Chinese community, our Jewish community, our Muslim community, and many, many others. Some challenges that we encounter at the local immigration partnership is that the main challenge is something that I think everybody deals with, and it's limited federal funding. It was very hard from 2010 to 2018 to get enough funding to actually make an impact in our community. They provide us with some money for salaries, some meetings, but then what happens after? At the end of the day, whether you are in whether you are in the public sector or in the nonprofit sector, you have to deal like it's a business to be able to actually make an impact in the community. You need resources to be able to ensure that you will get organized, and that you'll be able to develop campaigns, and that you're able to have engagement. So because of that, we had a lot of lack of engagement from community members. It was hard for us to identify community gaps in Greater Sudbury. And we had a lack of understanding of what the LIP's role was in the community. And at the same time, overall, the community in Greater Sudbury had a lack of understanding about the role of immigration in the future of our community. I took over in 2018, as mentioned before, and we did a full restructure of the local immigration partnership. We formed a new and more diverse board of directors. We identified community groups with the help of the Northern Policy Institute. In 2018, we were approved for the call of proposal. We increased our budget, and we went from 3 activities to 11 activities at our local immigration partnership. Around the current work that we have right now, we have the development of a new strategic plan, our new terms of references. We have cultural outreach with 13 groups every year, and then the next year will be either follow-ups or outreach with new communities. And one of them is our the integration of our indigenous community in the matter of immigration. They need to be involved. They need to see what's happening in the community. They have a lot of feedback to give us, and they're definitely a partner in this journey. We have partnered with different organizations to identify systemic racism and discrimination, mostly in a community that is not as diverse as the GTA or Ottawa or Vancouver. And we are also providing cross-cultural training to public services to be able to mitigate and reduce cultural barriers and misunderstandings. And we're also supporting different anti-racism initiatives. All of this has to do with retention at the end of the day. And of course, we're developing a comprehensive and interactive asset map. So based on your immigration status, you will be able to see what services we currently have, what we don't have, and what are some of the solutions in the meantime to cover and to tackle some of those needs. And of course, the development of messaging of the importance of immigration for Greater Sudbury is huge. Maybe for the GTA might not be as common because of so much diversity and the importance of immigration, but for a community like Sudbury, it is important to remember because the last wave of wave of immigration in Greater Sudbury was truly in World War II. We have seen waves of immigrations after that, but not as large. So sometimes people can forget their immigrant background and what immigration brought to their community. And we have developed an interactive map that we are distributing all over our community to discuss why immigration is important, including our out-migration levels, low immigration rates, rising life expectancy, and declining fertility rates, for example. And this is why we're in economic development to promote this, how adding 500 new immigrants to our workforce will actually bring $41 million to our community in different spendings. And that's just 500 individual newcomers that enter our workforce. And of course, we see a lot of different jobs and different demands that are going to increase by 2026. For example, blasters, physicians, dentists, veterinarians, and all of those, we need to cover that. And in Greater Sudbury, we have 36,000 people that will be retiring in the next 15 years, but we only have 25,000 people to replace those jobs. So that is extremely important for us to tackle. And of course, through diversity, our community can continue to draw on a larger range of skills and experiences to solve general issues. So when it comes to our refugee claimant population, I would say that in the past couple of years, skyrocketed. The majority of our refugee claimants we have from Caribbean islands, we have from Latin America, but the majority of them are from Nigeria currently. And there is a lack of resources to support asylum seekers in Greater Sudbury. Greater Sudbury was used to a lot of international students. Greater Sudbury was used to spouses that came to join a family member, parent sponsorship, work permits, and things like that, but never asylum seekers or refugee claimants. So that is a huge, we have a lack of resources there. For example, our YMCA newcomer services was only funded to support 60 asylum seekers, and now they have over 460 asylum seekers that they took care of. So it truly shows you the lack of resources that we have. We have lack of understanding from some GTA shelters about the limitations of Greater Sudbury. As you know, Greater Sudbury will continue to push for population growth, and we continue to ensure that we're a welcoming and diverse community, but there are some limitations that a lot of housing advisors in shelters must understand and screen prior to recommending Greater Sudbury as a community. I will give an example. There was this mother that has a child with special needs that had to go every week to sick kids in Toronto. All right, housing advisor at the shelter told her that she will be able to get those services here in Sudbury every week, the same way she did it in Toronto. And that, unfortunately, it's not true. She had to, with very limited resources, drive every week back to Toronto to be able to get her child the help the child needed. And ended up moving back to Toronto. It was very dramatic, very stressful. So we need to continue to work with shelters to understand the limitations of Greater Sudbury. The ability of virtual hearings for refugee claimants in 2020 and almost in 2021, it is unacceptable that our refugee claimants have to drive 3.5, 4 hours all the way to Toronto to be able to get a hearing that actually they don't take. The hearing period actually it's longer how long you wait outside than what the actually hearing takes. So that is very unfortunate. We're working with our MPs to see how that works, and hopefully it could be an advantage of the current pandemic to push more virtual hearings for our refugee claimants. And of course, as mentioned in the prior presentation, limited access to some healthcare services. If you think that in Toronto there is of course limitation for healthcare services, for walk-in clinics or dentists or for the flu shot, in Sudbury is worse. They are not aware of the interim federal health. We even had to go in a meeting with our hospital billing department because they were not aware of it. It is not familiar in Greater Sudbury. So we've been working very hard, including mental health services. It has been very hard to get access to services for refugee claimants. Some of them have had to drive to Toronto to a walk-in clinic that actually offers an it's okay processing Blue Cross because we don't have any walk-in clinic currently in Sudbury that does that. And the other thing that has been very, very damaging is rumors. There has been a lot of rumors within the refugee claimant community about Sudbury that are unfortunately not true. We also have limitations with subsidized housing. We also have limitations in the number of shelters that we have. Some of the rumors are as following. If I go to Sudbury to a shelter, I will have subsidized housing within 48 hours. If I go to subsidized housing department in Sudbury, they will give me a key to a house right away. Our house is going to be fully furnished. That is not true as well. So unfortunately, there is some misunderstandings and some rumors that we need to tackle, because at the end of the day, it is going to be mentally draining for the refugee claimants and their families when they get here. There is processes in place to be able to relocate to Greater Sudbury through subsidized housing, and that is the best way to do it, accessing all of the services, the YMCA, newcomer services, and they can help you and refer you to the appropriate channels to make your settlement as smooth as possible. Currently, because of COVID-19, things have slowed down, but our numbers for subsidized housing are also now gone from 1 year to 5 years wait for subsidized housing, even those in an emergency status to get a shelter, to get a house right away. So it has been a little stressful, but we've also had a lot of success stories. We've had cases where people, their hearings got approved, they became permanent residents, they were able to get out of the subsidized system and rent their own house or even get a mortgage for their own place. We've had a lot of success stories, but unfortunately we have a lot of current challenges that we still have to tackle as a community that never had so much levels of immigration. There are some recommendations that I have, of course, for the different levels of government. Is And one of them is the inclusion of Northern Ontario stakeholders in policy development. We are over not being taken into consideration when making decisions and taking only the reality of big metropolitan cities to be able to tackle different gaps. You need to take into consideration those communities that are growing, such as Greater Sudbury. They need to understand our geographical and community needs. They need to continue to support data and research capacity, and of course, support secondary migration pre-arrival services. We don't have pre-arrival services in Greater Sudbury for people that are moving from other countries, but we also don't have capacity for those that are doing secondary migration from the GTA here. And it's a lot of folks. If we don't have those services, how can we link them to the appropriate channels? Our settlement services are doing their best, but it's just not enough. I thank you very much for your time. If some of you would like to contact me for further discussions, I am open to that. My email address is at the bottom. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Enrique, for this wonderful presentation and giving us ideas about what is happening in the Greater Sudbury area. Now we have our last presenter, and her name is Sara Asalya. She is the founder of the Newcomer Students Association of Ryerson and community facilitator. Sara is an award-winning leader and immigrant rights advocate. She is a founder and president of the Newcomer Students Association. She is also a program manager at a Newcomer Women's Services Toronto, spreading a leadership development program for immigrant and refugee women. She will present today on empowering approaches and best practices when working with refugee communities. It will also shed light on limitations and systematic and structural barriers faced by this segment when accessing support services. And her presentation will also offer an example of a unique program that is designed to empower and build the leadership capacity of immigrant and refugee women. So I believe that Sara wanted us to share the screen, and I will share out my screen with the presentation of Sara, and then she can let me know when to move to next slides. So I will start sharing my screen, and we should be able to see the screen in a few minutes or few seconds. All right, so I will put it into a full screen and then give the floor to Sara to give us her insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Saad. If the participants don't mind, I'm going to be off the camera. I'm just multitasking behind the screen, but I will be present, and hopefully I will turn on my camera during the Q&A period at the end. Saad, I don't see the presentation. I don't see the slide.
Is everyone able to see the presentation, or?
No, I just see the.
All right, so I can share my screen, and then from there.
Yeah, perfect.
You can see it now?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you. Thank you, Jacky and Helton and Enrique, for an insightful presentation. And thanks for the conference planning committee for giving me the opportunity to speak. It's nice to see so many familiar faces and new faces. So thank you for joining us. I'll start by sharing a little bit about myself, my background, and my involvement in the migration space and refugee resettlement and integration here in Canada. I am originally from Palestine, and I came to Canada with my husband about 8-9 years ago. We applied through the skilled workers program. So we came through the economic class category, not as refugees and not as asylum seekers. Even though we came from a war-torn country, we were privileged that we had a choice and we were able to make our own decision to immigrate to Canada. We were privileged in the sense that we didn't have to risk our lives, cross borders, or make fatal decisions to cross rivers to seek asylum here in Canada. So I always like to just situate myself and where I'm coming from. I usually have a hard time introducing myself as I wear different hats and I have different roles within different spaces in the community. But as Saad introduced me, I am the founder of the Newcomer Student Association of Ryerson, a small grassroots organization supporting and empowering immigrant and refugee students in their access, transitioning to and integration to post-secondary education. I also work at the Newcomer Women's Services. It's one of the settlement agencies providing frontline settlement and integration support to many newcomers. I also work at Ryerson, leading different events and projects for them. I am currently a graduate student in the field of higher education. I am the mother of 3 children. I'm going to bring all my identities into this conversation, so give people a little background of what I bring to this conversation and what's my background. I am an organizing member of the Rights of Non-Status Women Network, and I sit on different nonprofit boards, including Agent Court Community Services Association, one of the leading settlement agencies supporting refugee resettlement. I've also been part of a research project at the University of Toronto about youth, war, and migration, and that project has focused on the everyday realities of youth and young adults from the Middle East as they have experienced war, militarization, displacement, migration, and resettlement in a new society. I'll start my presentation with a little bit of background information about the Canadian refugee resettlement system. I won't spend a lot of time, as Jacky has shed light on how this Canadian resettlement system works. So there are 2 major categories of refugees in Canada, as you can see in the screen. The number one is the refugee resettled from overseas, and those come through different streams: the government-assisted refugees, and the private sponsor refugees. As many of you are familiar, when many community members and churches and NGOs and families came together through the Group of 5 sponsorship to bring a lot of Syrian refugees. And the other category is refugee claimants, and those who are individuals who apply for refugee status upon arrival in Canada. I do agree with Jacky in the sense that people who are coming through a private sponsorship or government sponsorship, those receive a permanent residency status upon arrival in Canada. They receive a lot of assistance through their sponsorship program. It is not as tough and as a lonely process as refugee claimants who came here and they don't know where to go from the first day. So there is a huge difference between these 2 refugee categories. When I started my career here in Canada, I started in the settlement sector, and I worked with different settlement organizations, including Lifeline Syria, YMCA Newcomer Information Center, United Church of Canada, and Agent Court Community Services. As you can tell, some of these organizations, such as Lifeline Syria, they played a role in resettling and bringing refugees to the country. They did not provide any settlement support. Other organizations such as the YMCA and AXA, etc., they do provide settlement support. So I worked with mainly 100 of Syrian refugees between the time of 2015 and 2017. And that was the time when the country has welcomed and accepted a lot of Syrian refugees into the country. Can we move into the next slide, please?
Yes.
I thought it's important maybe to talk a little bit about what is the difference between settlement and integration. And we oftentimes just mention settlement and integration. But before diving into the indicators of settlement and integration, we must recognize that settlement and integration are multi-dimensional concepts. And each individual has a different and unique experience. we are not a homogeneous group. I know that immigrants, refugees, international students, we do have a lot of shared experiences and challenges, but each one of us has a very unique experience, have different needs and different experiences. So we shouldn't be treating them as a one homogeneous group. For example, what has helped me to settle and integrate might look different than another individual or person. So taking a quick look here at the different dimensions, we see economic, social, cultural, and political. And we see that there is a very important difference between settlement and integration. As you can see, settlement is a short term and integration is more of a long-term strategy to integrate refugees into the wider society. So for the economic, if I'm giving an example, settlement looks like entering the job market and having financial stability or independence. It doesn't matter. You might be a doctor and you have financial independence through working as a taxi driver or pouring coffee at Tim Hortons. And we see a lot of these examples. Highly educated, highly experienced immigrants, refugees are not working in their fields. And the first step they want to do is really trying to find ways to settle, to provide for their families, to enter the job market. And that's what we call settlement. If we want to look at the long-term integration, it's more like career advancement. It's more like an individual's actually working in their field of study and experience. And this is what we need to focus on. The settlement sector, and it is called a settlement sector. It's not called an integration sector. Most of the services that they provide are essential and urgent services for someone to settle when they arrive. Unfortunately, I don't see a lot of focus on long-term integration, but rather just settlement support. If we're looking also at the social, culture, and political dimension, settlement really looks as someone is just starting to getting to adapt, while long-term integration is that you have a full participation in the society in all these aspects. I do want to mention that, and I took this from the Canadian Council of Refugees, when they define the long-term integration under cultural dimension, it's more like they are saying adapting or reassessing values. Personally, I did not like the way that this has been framed. For me, it looked like more like reassessing is more like assimilating, trying to assimilate this segment into the Canadian culture. For me, the long-term integration could look like willingness to connect across differences and embrace diversity and accept other culture. When we come here, we don't have to live in our own bubble and stick to our to the group of people that share the same religion, ethnicity, or culture. Next slide, please.
All right. Here we go.
So I'm quickly going to speak about the refugee resettlement needs, and many of them look really similar to, immigrant resettlement needs. So, and this is one of the things also that the settlement agencies provide: information and guidance, referrals to employment services, housing, financial stability, language support and training, initial orientation about Canada, support in healthcare, cultural integration, social and emotional support. So I was asked to talk a little bit about challenges working with refugees, and I'm going to talk about this from my own experience working with this segment. The first one is language and cultural barriers. As a settlement counselor or as a frontline worker or an intake counselor, you don't expect that you're going to meet refugees who are from the same culture or speak the same language. So paying attention to body cues is very important. Paying attention to the needs of these refugees is very important, but language and culture remain a huge barrier when we are supporting and communicating with this segment. The other one that I want to talk about is role limitation. We all know that there is a lot of limitation when we are working in a system. And the settlement sector, unfortunately, it's not very flexible. It's not very open to different and new things. So if you need to define your role when you are working with this segment, is it an advocacy role? Are you working to advocate for them? And if you're a settlement counsel, this is very hard. This is near impossible. Are you a counselor, which most of the time, if you are working on a settlement capacity, you are advising these refugees in a counseling capacity? Are you an intake worker? You just, meet them. You don't have time to listen to their story. You can't advise them. It's a very cold relationship. It's a one-way relationship. You have a sheet, you have questions, you have 15 minutes to ask this question for the refugee to answer them in order to determine if this individual qualified to access our services or not. Setting boundaries and the nature of a relationship. And are we treating them as client versus service provider? Or there's really a nice talk that I'm going to share in the chat after my presentation by Dina Ladd from Community Action Center. And she talks about the urgent need for nonprofits and settlement agencies to treat their clients as members of the community, as participants, as experts in their own lived experience. We should stop, treating clients and those people knocking in our doors need help and need service. I really don't like the concept of client versus service provider. And in my time working in the settlement sector, I've seen these kind of relationship. There is power dynamic, if you wish, when you are a counselor and there is a vulnerable client or individual in front of you, you really most of the time don't have time to listen. You pay attention to the data and the numbers more than you pay attention to the story of the individual and how can you really respond to their specific and unique needs. So we need to treat them as, expert in their own lived experience. We need to empower them. We need to treat them as part of this community, rather just an individual coming, asking for our help. One of the other challenges also working with this segment is dealing with people who are under extreme emotional stress. And I'm going also to tie this to the next point, which is the need for settlement counselor and settlement agency to provide trauma-informed care and services. Learning about how to provide trauma-informed care is extremely important for professionals working in this field, working in the sector. These types of training can provide information about how to deal with mental health crises, how to respond when someone breaks down emotionally, and how to act sensitively towards clients without tiptoeing around them. Refugees and special refugee claimants have been through a lot, and some of them tend to panic when things start to go in the wrong direction. I have seen this, I have experienced this myself, people breaking down into my office in tears. They don't know where to go, they don't know where to start. And I think keeping calm and talking them through the situation to show them that they are not really in crisis or alone is a key in this situation. Even if you don't know the full story, even if you don't know how challenges and difficult what they have been through, acting with care and sensitivity and providing structure through meetings will be a key piece in helping them succeed and get over this crisis. Again, I'm talking about treating them as not a homogeneous group. An immigrant has a different experience than a refugees. A sponsored refugee has a different experience than a refugee claimant, and we should stop operating from a one-size-fits-all kind of mentality or approach in the settlement sector. I've seen a lot of counselors really don't have the experience to deal with different situations and different experiences, and they just go with a one-size-fits-all. They have one solution for every single issue and problem and challenge, and this is shouldn't be the case. And the last point, when you are working as a frontline worker dealing with this segment in particular, many of us tend to experience burnout. And once you are burned out, it's very hard to recover. So you have to put strategies for yourself for self-care. And in order to care for community, in order for community care to happen, you have to take care of yourself. Burnout is very high in frontline workers and people who are working as counselors and advisors. So this is something that we need to pay attention and make sure that our staff have the opportunity to, for mental health breaks and for self-care strategies in place. One thing I'm going to mention in terms of the challenges, it's not mentioned in this slide, but many of the refugees that I have worked with have this feeling of stigma. They have stigma behind being a refugee. Refugee word is becoming a stigma. And really our role is to empower them and try to break down the stigma, break down barriers associated to this stigma, and try to challenge stereotypes associated with refugees. Thanks to the media and the way the media is portraying negative images for refugees, and to some community members who are amplifying these negative images, it became hard for refugees themselves to have self-confidence, self-authorship, and it became really an issue. And, you know, refugees themselves are losing the ability to believe in themselves. And I'll just mention a quick story. I was working with one of my students who came to Canada as a refugee claimant. She has been in the country only for 3 months. She did not get her hearing. She does not have an official refugee status yet. And she was able to land a job in a really huge, reputable institution. She went back to the refugee camp she's in, and of course, all her other friends and other refugees has asking her, did you land a job in a factory? And she said, no, I actually work on this huge institution. And the next kind of assumption or the next kind of comment, what do you work? Do you clean offices? Are you a janitor? So refugees themselves are losing the ability to visualize themselves in leadership places, to visualize themselves in good careers. And the reason is that this whole notion about stereotypes and the images that we see in the media. So it was fascinating to see how refugees themselves are having hard time to believe that one of them is landing a good job, not necessarily, you know, a survival job in a gas station, in a factory. So now I'm going, yeah?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Is this slide before the refugee women? Okay. So I put this slide because I felt that refugee women in particular are facing further barriers and challenges just because of their gender as women. And oftentimes they are at higher risk of being victims of gender-based violence due to factors such as lack of access to information and resources, social isolation, low socioeconomic status, and precarious immigration status. And sometimes, as it was mentioned by Jacky, they don't know, they are not aware that some of the resources are available in the community. Most of the time, they are being silenced out of fear of deportation or fear to lose custody of their children, and that's in the case if they have a precarious immigration status. They follow a different integration pathway than refugee men. And this is something I can relate to. As a mother, of course, there's no need for me to mention the lack of access to affordable childcare. So for me, I wanted my husband first to go ahead to do his education, to find a job and a career, and for me to stay taking care of my children. And after that, we take turn. We really, the immigrant family, refugee family, cannot afford for both the mom and dad to go out and work. Someone needs to go out and provide for the family, and the other one is going to, of course, there's going to be a lot of sacrifices to take care of the family, take care of the children, and when the time comes, they go and try to access support and settlement services. The last point is that they face multiple barriers to employment, including gender, race-based discrimination, precarious or low income, and lack of social network and affordable childcare. So I'll talk a little bit about the limitation and exclusion practice within that sector. And I'm glad that I'm not the only one who's going to mention that the settlement sector suffers from financial instability and lack of sustainable funding models. And when we are dealing with a sector that is financially unstable, that is also reflected on the quality and efficiency of their employees. I was one of those people who started a career in the settlement sector. I was hired from, 4-month contract to another 3-month contract and sometimes 2-month contract. And you only get a 1-week notice that the government is not sending funding to renew your contract. You can imagine that this sector is, offering precarious employment to their employees. There is no job security for us. And therefore, this reflects our quality of work when we deal with clients. You need to provide your family. You keep thinking about your contract that is going to end soon. You are on an ongoing basis of trying to look for other jobs and other employment opportunities. So this is a very stressful environment. And sometimes it's a toxic environment for settlement counselors to be dealing with. The other huge problem in this sector is that federally funded programs and services are only provided to those who have a permanent residency status. That means refugee claimants, that means foreign and international students and temporary foreign workers do not have access to such services. The limited training and professional development opportunities for frontline workers, and that's because, again, there is not enough funding to provide these training opportunities. But we all know that there is an urgent need for these frontline workers to receive training on cultural sensitivity, anti-oppression practices, and trauma-informed training. We need for the settlement sector to shift from providing settlement-focused services to integration. And if you remember in my second slide, I talked about how settlement is just short-term, but integration services is more of taking an empowering approach to really help these individuals to fully integrate and participate in the community through economic empowerment, through career advancement, through leadership opportunities. And the last point is a lack of gender-specific programs that promote and advance refugee women leadership skills and knowledge. We really don't have many of these specific programs that focus on refugee women. Now I'm going to give a quick example at some of the programs that I was involved with that focus on leadership, advocacy, and economic empowerment. This program is run by the Newcomer Women's Services, and it was a 6-month leadership development program for immigrant and refugee women. Now, the interesting thing is when we put the call out to recruit, we put the call out for immigrant women, thinking that the immigrant word will encompass everyone. We wanted to be intentional, inclusive, and we wanted this to be accessible. So we did not turn anyone away. And guess what? Over 70% of the participants in that program identify as refugee claimant. They just came to the country. And the fact that we are one of few agencies that allow them to participate, even the fact that they don't have a permanent residency status is huge. I hope other settlement agencies will consider, finding other funding opportunities, maybe city funded or provincial level, or even seek sponsorship to run programs and services that is inclusive and accessible to everybody, regardless of their immigration status. Now the program worked to reduce social isolation and gender violence by building leadership skills, self-sufficiency, and mutual support among at-risk, multicultural, and multi-ethnic immigrant and refugee women.
Sorry, Sarah, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we have like a pressure of time, and we want to open the floor for like a roundtable discussion. I will show you the rest of the slides, and you can let me know which one you want to focus for a minute or two to wrap up the presentation. Thank you.
Sure, I'll skip this one. I'll talk quickly about this one. So we came up with a model to redefine the leadership of immigrant and refugee women. We want to train them and equip them with leadership skills. We're not building the leadership of corporate executives or the leadership of already engaged citizens. We're talking about building the leadership of vulnerable community of immigrant and refugee women. So you can quickly see that this component of leadership is about self-advocacy, self-empowerment, and self-actualization. I won't talk more about this. Saad, if we can move into the next slide. This is really important because this is some of the empowering approaches to refugee resettlement. We really need to invest in the refugee talent, focus on their leadership, promote and prioritize refugee mental health, focus on long-term integration, as I mentioned before, build their confidence, resiliency, and self-authorship, create safe and empowering spaces to share their stories, make them experts in their own lived experiences, and center their voices by engaging them in decision-making processes. And the last slide, best practices with working with refugee communities. We need to offer culturally appropriate services. We need to understand the diverse and lived experiences of these refugees. We need to operate from an anti-oppressive framework and foster independence in our clients. We need to propose meaningful engagement opportunities and empower them to be able to make their own informed decisions. Offer supportive, free of judgment environment, particularly when we are working with refugees who are traumatized. And finally, provide accessible and inclusive services where all refugees, regardless of their immigration status, are welcome to participate. And the last slide is just my contact information if there's any questions.
Sorry, I will put it back. Yes, here it is. Can everyone see this last slide? All right. Thank you for sharing these wonderful ideas, Sarah. Thank you all the presenters. Now we will open the floor for some roundtable questions. And I will put the questions also in the chat section if you have them, you have access to them. And our first question will be around the federal and municipal support that non-for-profit organizations get from like the government about the refugees resettlement process. So the first question is, to what extent do you believe that the federal and provincial government have provided assistance to government or non-government organizations and settlement agencies for the refugee resettlement process? I will put this question in the chat box. And if we have people that want to answer, they're more than welcome. If people have access. So I will repeat the question again. To what extent do you believe that the federal and provincial government have provided assistance to non-governmental organizations and settlement agencies for the refugee resettlement process? And
I could start.
Yes.
If you want, Saad. And I would say, I don't want to speak on behalf of all of the panelists here, but I would say not enough. I truly see with disbelief the federal government and the provincial government fights over who is responsible for covering expenses for individuals with precarious immigration status, and it's sad. It's sad that most of the time is, I already gave you money to take care of this, and then the other side says, it's not enough, I already used it. And then we have children, we have parents in the middle of it, of a fight for funding. And we're in the middle of a fight for funding. It is not fair for our settlement organizations to scramble for resources for people with precarious immigration status. I feel that there needs to be more conversations, more mature conversations between both level of government, federal and provincially, to assist refugee claimants in our community. And in my case, especially in communities that do not have so much social assistance or volunteer assistance, such as the ones that you have in the GTA. It's extremely important. I would say not enough funding, and there is too much fighting and not enough response from both levels of government. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrique. Anyone else from the audience are also welcomed to answer. Please feel free. Yes, Jacky?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I had to pop back in on my phone instead. I think I don't have too much to say about funding, except that I think what I experienced a lot is just we aren't eligible for most resettlement funds. The ones we are always short-term project-based. So you're always kind of reinventing yourself and kind of pretzeling your work to fit in, or taking on extra work just to sort of fit a category for like a 12-week fund. That's been our experience.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jacky.
I can quickly go. I really agree with what Enrique said. It's really, the system is inflexible. The funding is being decreased and being cut in the last couple of years. And for example, the program we are running now, it's pending funding. We have been waiting for almost 8 months to get funding, and now we are going through, you know, corporate sponsorships. We're putting sponsorship packages, we're seeking donations, we're seeking community support, and we're knocking on doors for people to sponsor a program that is providing essential services and skills for many refugee women. So really many organizations are scrambling. They can't rely or depend on this funding, because all of a sudden, as I mentioned in my presentation, I was working on a 4-month contract, and 1 week before that contract ended, we got a notice from the government. You get very short notice, and then the department needs to shift, need to scramble, need to look for other resources, and you know, people are being laid off. There is nothing. And when you get a funding, you get a funding on a very short notice, that you know, you need to hire for this specific funding. You have 2 weeks only, and if you don't use this funding, it's gonna expire by the end of fiscal year. So it's always with short notice, always people are scrambling with very limited resources.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah. And we have Sherry. Sherry, would you like to participate in an audio? I know that you wrote in the chat box. Do you want me to read what you wrote, or you want to answer?
Sure, thank you. I'll just review it quickly. So I'm in Sudbury, I'm in Greater Sudbury as well, and settlement and resettlement, typically we see different activities going along with that when applying to government for funding. When we're looking at settlement services with the provincial government, there's a specific amount of activities that have to be outlined in the proposals, such as welcoming communities, different initiatives that we have to be able to work within. And then resettlement is usually a separate activity that we have to apply for. So it can become difficult when, if you're an agency that typically only works with settlement, then if you're looking at resettlement, it's usually another initiative. But in terms of funding, depending on the size of the community, depending on the issues, GTA sees a lot more funding than the North, unfortunately, in terms of these activities. So Enrique did a great job at outlining a lot of the issues that the North sees. But yeah, in terms of provincial and federal funding down this way, it has always been a challenge.
Thank you, Sherry. Any other answers before we get to the next question?
Yeah,
Yes.
Very briefly, this is Helton. Very briefly, I think for Matthew House, definitely we don't get a lot of funding from the government. But let me just make a general comment. My comment is there is a clear link between immigration and economic development of Canada. I think at a political level, there should be this understanding, and that we should put our mouth where our money is, or our money where our mouth is, because I do not seem to get the full understanding that there is appreciation at the provincial and the federal level of the interplay between immigration and economic development. Even from a balanced economic development, outlying cities need to attract immigrants to spur development from a labor or commercial perspectives. I really think there is a disconnect there. There should be more political dialogue in the area of understanding this interplay between the two pathways. Thank you.
Thank you, Helton. All right, so if you don't have any answers, I will move to the next question. We will focus on the community now. And my question is, what do you think is the role of communities in the resettlement process? What other resources communities need in order to improve their involvement in the resettlement process? And I will put this question in the chat box.
I can speak to that a little bit if that's all right.
Yes,
it's
sure.
Jacky. I think, like I was mentioning before, one of the things that came up when we surveyed former residents was not really a money piece, but a friendship, community building, knowing people that you can count on piece. And I think part of delivering on that for people, because it is a high need, is engaging with faith communities, cultural communities, neighborhood associations, and really engaging people and saying, like, these are your new neighbors. We are all responsible for this, right? We try to, it's our goal that when everybody moves out of Matthew House, that they have at least one volunteer mentor who's going to keep in touch with them, keep calling them, just seeing how they are. It doesn't always work out because personalities and all of that, but that is a goal. And I think it's just something that it's such a sticky piece, but it really needs a lot of thought to be executed well. And it just comes up time and time again.
Okay, great, thank you. We have Danielle that shared something in the chat. Would you like to please like give us your insights, whether in this question or the question that we asked before, if you want?
Sorry, I just raised a question coming up if there is a chance to ask these questions later.
Okay, yes, sure. We'll make sure we have like 5 minutes and
Okay.
we can answer your question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else want to answer this question, the role of community in the resettlement of refugees in Canada?
I would say that we, mostly in communities such as Sudbury, we rely a lot on volunteerism. And I think that we need to encourage newcomers to become those volunteers after resettlement. In communities such as Sudbury, we have seen a lot of volunteerism, but when you do a survey of demographics of those volunteers, elders. And we see it in the GTA as well. We see it, there's a lot of elders that, whether it's religious-based organizations, we need to encourage more volunteerism in our communities. Volunteerism is huge in Canada. It's a stepping stone to so many jobs, to so many opportunities. We need to be careful with it because a lot of organizations might see it as free labor or free, or taking advantage of someone's time. But if we humanely encourage volunteerism, it's extremely important. Now, when our Nigerian community numbers skyrocketed in Greater Sudbury, now we're seeing those folks that have settled and that have jobs and that have their kids in school taking part in helping other communities, regardless of the origin, regardless of their religious beliefs. We must encourage volunteerism in our newcomer community. And I think we have a lot of more work to do in regards to that. Because if somebody's not helping us, we need to look at around us and say, maybe I can be the help. Maybe I need to be the one stepping up. So within our own community, We need to be able to encourage that. I was helped. I need to help now. Thank you.
These are really good points, Enrique. Thank you. Any other contribution for this question? If not, then we will move to the last question that we have for today. And now we are trying to reimagine the refugee settlement process. Sorry. And in reimagining this resettlement process, I have a question. How can we ensure that the voice of refugees are heard or will be heard more often? Are there any ways for us to reimagine the resettlement process, not from what we've seen so far, but from our own perspective? And I will write the question in the chat box, and please feel free to answer.
I don't want to be the one that jumps in right away after a comment, but I would say, again, being engaged. Look at boards of directors. Who is wanting to be part of a board of directors for an organization? Be that voice. Be the representative for those that might not want to speak up, because we're talking about folks that, in my case, for example, I am from a country that if you speak up, there is a chance that you're gonna go to jail. Okay? You're afraid to speak up. I heard from a friend that also came here as a refugee, and he's like, I just want to have the most boring life I can because I already went through so much in my country of origin. Speak up. Try to find boards of directors that you can sit on. Volunteer. Be that voice. Because in boards of directors, you can meet with political leaders. You can try to push for different things that you maybe wouldn't be able to do as a common or average citizen. Let's try to make our boards of directors more diverse. We continue to see our boards of directors in different levels of organizations very, very non-diverse. And that is not, it is our responsibility to be there, to push, and to be there and knock at doors, even when somebody's not opening it.
Thank you so much, Enrique. We have Sherry.
Yes, and just to go on that point a little bit, if you can find your local MPP and become a voice for your generation and to become a voice for your cohort, whether that be young or old, and finding like-minded individuals and leading that voice with your local MPPs can really help bring the issue to the forefront and helping that person bring it to the House of Commons and bringing it to the bigger bodies that can help get some funding in your area for this reason. I really think that that would be a powerful move. And I know it's a move that we're slowly working toward when it comes to refugees, but we really do need to shine a light there with our local leaders.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Any other answers?
Saad, can I say something?
Yes, please, Daniel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel, and thank you, the RCIS team, Dr. Usha, Saad, Sohail, for organizing this, and thank you for all the presenters. For the third question that you mentioned, like reimagining the refugee resettlement sector. I've been working with refugees, especially in the resettlement sector, from the other side, that is interviewing refugees, preparing their cases, and trying to submit their application for resettlement to Canada and different other countries like the US, Australia, and different resettlement countries. From my experience, so I've also seen what's happening on this side, like living in Canada for some time. I've seen how refugees are resettled from overseas and how they face a lot of challenges in Canada once they are settled. So in terms of reimagining the refugee resettlement process itself, you've mentioned a very good point about making sure the refugees' voices are heard. But I also think it's also important to focus more on the pre-arrival process. because as you mentioned, if we are talking about the government-assisted refugee resettlement program, providing more information or more counseling or more information session or cultural orientation programs before refugees arrive to Canada, or even before they are selected or identified for resettlement. That could be something that can be very helpful, because the experience of those who are coming here on their own is completely different from those who are selected from overseas. So that part really needs some kind of overhaul or kind of reimagining in terms of selection, orientation, pre-arrival or pre-departure kind of orientation from there. There are still programs which provide refugees information about these things, but I think that could be further reimagined. I think Sara mentioned, for example, when refugees are asked if they have managed to find a good job, the other refugees would ask them, how did you manage to get this job? Or did you find a job in cleaning a corporate house? Because the orientation that they are given from that end is, okay, so when you go to Canada or when you go to the United States, you should not think of, like, the option that is given from that end is that this is the maximum that you can do. You know, it's true that the settlement challenges at the early stages would force you to clean floors or to go to factories or like survival jobs, but it should not end there. Like, there should be some kind of more information as to what refugees can become after resettlement, things like that. So I think there is more information that could be reimagined in that sense, like the pre-arrival orientation program can do well or can be improved. That's a suggestion that I can make.
That is a very important point. Link pre-settlement to the settlement and resettlement, every stage is connected. Yes, that's great. Thank you, Danielle. Any other answers for this last question? Maybe from some people that we didn't heard of, and they want to share. No. Well, Danielle, you have mentioned that you had some questions. If you would like to just give them briefly or give one of them to the floor, whoever wants to answer, if you would like. We have about like 3 minutes.
Okay, so I'm currently doing my PhD program in policy studies, so I'm focusing on Canada's refugee resettlement policy. So some of the questions that I raised may not be that very interesting for some people, but I feel like if you can get some idea as to the discrepancy in discourse, for example, if you see the proportion of refugees, it can be in all classes. It could be government assisted, it could be refugee claimants, it could be all classes of refugees. If you see the proportion of refugees compared to the other classes of immigrants, like the skilled workers, student visa, or all those economic classes, is very small proportion. But the debate or the discourse, the policy debates, the political platforms, and all those things oftentimes focus on refugees. So you hear about these queue jumpers, bogus refugee claimants. You hear about refugee influx, floods of refugees, things like that, which are kind of negative stereotypes about refugees that Sara mentioned. So I wanted to know what could be the reason for this kind of discrepancy. Like you don't hear a lot of debates or policy debates or political platforms running on the skilled migrants or the economics, but the focus is more on refugees. So that's one of the questions that I had. The second one was, if you see about the international obligation that Canada has, it is to the 1951 Convention. Yes, like Canada has an international obligation to provide protection for those who are within its borders. It's not really an international obligation for Canada to go overseas and resettle refugees here. But if you see the debates and the policies, it's kind of the other way around, which is the policies sometimes make it difficult for people to claim refugee status here in Canada once they arrive here. So they have different barriers, changes in the immigration policy, like the 2012, and a lot of restrictive changes are there. So I wanted to know, like, why is it reversed? Like, your international obligation is actually to provide and make it easy for refugees to make a protection claim while it's there in your border. But then the policies and debates, or the kind of the genuine refugees are said, it's those who are overseas, and that's who we want to bring here. So it's kind of, there's a discrepancy between the Canada's international obligation and what it actually does. So I wanted to know why these two things. So that's what I'm researching actually, so if it makes sense.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing these wonderful questions. And I don't know if some people here have partial answers. I can see Enrique raising his hand. If you can briefly, in 1 minute, because we will wrap up the session, if you can please share one answer. Yes.
Fight ignorance with facts. And I would say that that is the main priority. How do we continue to push forward the right information and the right numbers out there? For example, do you know that people that come to Canada as refugees are more likely to get out of social assistance 3 times faster than a Canadian born? Do you know that it is actually, the proportions that you said are very small compared to the large scale of immigration in our community? It is all about fighting ignorance with facts and with real numbers, truly showing the benefits that refugees and all immigrants bring to this country. I think that that is our pathway and the solution of ensuring that we have enough funding to fight those ignorant comments and things that maybe the media focus on for political reasons, and what sells most, what can share the news faster, how many likes can you get on a video, etc. That is my point at the end of the day. Immigration matters. Let's fight ignorance with facts, and let's be able to actually push for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enrique. And for closing comments, I would like to thank everyone that attended this session, our speakers, our professor, Dr. Usha George, and all the audience as well, and our team, Cherny and Suhail as well. I would like to tell you that today was the first session of 6 more sessions. We have 5 more sessions. And these 5 more sessions will be, one will be similar like today with the settlement workers and community organizations. And then we will host also refugees to speak about their lived experiences. And one other session will be with some other international representatives and some leaders in Canada. So we will get in touch with you very soon for the details. We will process this series on November and also part of December. We will give you more details soon, so please stay tuned and please spread the words with the people that might be interested to attend these sessions. I thank you so much for this first session. And I don't know if Dr. Usha would like to have a final comment, or that will be. Sorry, Dr. Usha, your microphone is muted.
Yeah, other than thanking the organizers, Tony McDermott, Suhail, and Saad, and all the presenters, I am very grateful for this conversation that we have had. We'll have more of those, and our goal is to have something a little more concrete and practical that we can pass on and that refugees can benefit from For example, the pre-arrival preparation that Daniel mentioned, I'm also one of those people who are very, very keen on much more pre-arrival stuff happening. For example, unlike the economic and other categories that are coming into Canada, the refugees are selected for different levels, even though different qualifications, even though their ability to settle in Canada is one of them. So we may be better off providing a little more support to them in terms of maybe English language or whatever it is that they need, so that when they come here, they don't feel totally strange, isolated, all of that. So there's a little more intense orientation that's required, of course, in addition to whatever we need to do here, which is, again, a lot more. And this Syrian study, as I mentioned, literally kind of brought it down for us in recent times, what it is that we absolutely need to do, from the point of view of the refugees who are settled here. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you so much, Dr. Usha.
Okay.